Retired civil servants are treasure troves of information. For every breaking news story that has us journalists giddy with excitement, they give us a history to that story, a perspective, a grounding to that story. Through their careers, they perform the all important task of governing the country, but post retirement, they perform the equally important task of being the memory keepers of India's institutions, of the Indian state. And that is why we at The Print have started this show. That is what has prompted us at The Print to start this new show called The Officer's Desk, in which we have retired civil servants come to us week after week and basically cater to our unending curiosity on what it takes to govern the Indian state. This week we have Ambassador Ajay Bisaria, a seasoned diplomat. You're familiar with him. You're also familiar with this magnificent book that he wrote on anger management, and this basically has to do with his time as the High Commissioner to Pakistan from 2017 to 2019. A very, very eventful posting, sir. Welcome to The Print, Ambassador.
Thank you, Sanya. Great to be on your show, and what a great idea, pulling in the what I call the retiree and getting them to talk of their experiences. I think that oral history is important.
Exactly, exactly. And there's so much curiosity that lay persons have about the Indian bureaucracy. Anything to do with UPSC, IAS, IFS just generates so much curiosity. But having said that, people know very little what it takes to be a bureaucrat. So in this show, we thought we will sort of talk to retired civil servants who can take us through the journey right from what it was like to take the UPSC exam and then to go up the ladder in civil services. So, first up, I want to ask you what your life before the IFS really was. What did you study? I know you went to St. Stephen's. Were you from Delhi? Just tell us about your life before the UPSC exam that you took.
Right. So I was born in Kashmir.
Okay.
My father was on a transferable job, a government job. So I was born there and had my education in different parts of the country. Early education in Mumbai. Then we came to Delhi when I was in class 4, and I was mostly in Delhi and got my education till St. Stephen's College, where I did economics. And right after that, I did an MBA.
Okay.
So
And
getting
MBA was from?
from IIM Calcutta.
Okay.
So I went to IIM Calcutta, did my MBA right after college, because that seemed like the natural thing to do. And I had somewhere at the back of my mind this idea that maybe I should explore the civil services. So that's how it happened. It wasn't a huge cottage industry in those days.
Yeah.
It wasn't serious coaching or anything like that.
It's
You
way
just
more than
took
a
exam.
cottage industry now. It's a
Yeah.
huge, huge
Well,
industry.
it's now a national pastime as
Yeah.
well. So, but it wasn't that in the 80s, and I had it somewhere at the back of my mind. And the idea of doing an MBA was an insurance policy.
Oh,
But
okay.
what's my plan B if I
Yeah.
don't make it?
Yeah.
So I thought I should have some useful degrees
And were
with
you
me.
always sure that you wanted to join the IFS, the Indian Foreign Service? Because obviously, when you take the UPSC exam, you don't know which service you'll end up being assigned. How did that work out for you? How did you decide
Yeah,
that?
so it was very interesting. It's a story which I laugh at now when I think about it. I intended to join the Indian Administrative Service. I hadn't thought about it much, but when I took the exam and started learning more, I hadn't met a foreign service officer at all. And it wasn't a day of social media, so you
Yeah.
wouldn't come across their stories.
Yeah.
And then a friend of mine who was also joining the service, whose father was in the administrative service, said, I'm going to take the foreign service. So I said, okay, let's find out more about it. And the more I found out about it, I found it's interesting.
Yeah.
And one thing that drew me to it was that you work on a broader canvas. It's a global canvas rather than just a national and a specific canvas. So I switched my preferences, and in those days, you could switch your preferences after the result came. So when the result came, and I was assigned the 65th position and was
And was
getting.
this your first attempt?
Now, this was my second attempt.
Okay.
So again, a story to that. I first took the exam and I got offered some grade A service, and I said, now it's time for plan B, because I wanted either the IAS, or I hadn't even then thought of the Foreign Service. And I didn't get it. So I said I will go abroad and do a PhD in management.
Hmm.
It so happened that, but I thought I'll take a second crack at it.
Hmm.
And I took the second crack, and this time I
Yeah.
got the result. So I got the IAS, or I was offered the IAS. And then we were given 15 days in those days by the UPSC to switch your preferences.
Okay.
You could do
Hmm.
that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And after talking to a few people in the Foreign Service and the IAS, I made a regular table. I assigned marks for each factor. And then I came to the conclusion that the Foreign Service seems.
What was one negative about the IAS that you that you thought of
Yeah,
then?
so one thing that I didn't like at all was that there could be a lot of corruption there.
Hmm.
And I said, that is,
Yeah.
horrible. I don't want to be ever dealing with
Hmm.
tainted money, and I have
Hmm.
to make moral compromises. So that was a negative. And
Hmm.
of course, I was told there's a lot of political interference
Hmm.
at the district level and so on. So there
Yeah.
were a couple of negatives, but it was mostly positive. I was willing to switch from a private sector scheme to the government,
Hmm.
but the dilemma became whether I should join the administrative or the foreign
Yeah.
service.
Yeah.
And then I flipped it, and there seemed to be lots of positives about the
Hmm.
foreign service. It
Hmm.
seemed exciting. It seemed um, being part of something very global.
Yeah.
And so I made that change.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I took that plunge, and that's how I landed up.
Yeah. When I cover the bureaucracy here in India, obviously my interaction is a lot more with IAS, IPS officers. IFS officers seem to be a breed of their own, kind of distant from the rest of the bureaucracy. Is that how you see it? And are you, as diplomats, seen as outsiders within the civil services of India?
Not really.
Hmm.
Not really. I think everyone is informed by their
Hmm.
experience, right? In my case, I did at least 2 or 3 or 4 assignments, and I spent a lot of my time in Delhi,
Correct.
which were really assignments that the IAS would be very interested
Hmm. Hmm.
in doing and would rate very highly.
Hmm.
So, for instance, I was private secretary with the Prime Minister
Correct.
for
Yeah.
5 years. That is normally a job that IAS officers have been doing.
Hmm.
I was also in the Commerce Ministry,
Yeah.
dealing with commerce as an
Yeah.
undersecretary. That is, I was
Hmm.
posted at the World Bank on a finance ministry post
Yeah.
as an
Yeah.
advisor to
Yeah.
the executive
Yeah.
director. And even a couple of other assignments. When I was in Germany, I was on a commerce ministry post.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I have done a mix of assignments, and really speaking, I came to the conclusion, and if I was advising a young person
Hmm.
today, trying to decide between the IAS and the Foreign Service, that if you have the aptitude for both, you can't really go wrong in either career. Both can be very interesting. I've
Hmm.
done bits and pieces and picks of
Hmm.
assignments of both.
Yeah.
And I think one can't really go wrong
Hmm.
in that choice. So
Hmm.
one really needs to look at one's inclination, interest,
Hmm.
and then make that judgment. But I think in terms of the career path you take and the kind of experiences, both are very rich.
Hmm. Hmm. No, Ambassador, I've been a student of sociology. So there's this book that I actually came across before while I was preparing for this interview. It's called The Cosmopolitan Elites, where the author, who's a scholar herself, she talks about what it sociologically means to be an Indian diplomat. And, she talks about something called habitus, which is the air that surrounds an Indian diplomat. And actually, growing up, that you one had a certain picture of what it meant to be a diplomat. That's why I could relate to what she was saying. And she says it is a certain Sean Stevens type of a guy, usually who speaks immaculate, who has an immaculate pronunciation of French, would prefer French wine over Indian whiskey, would read the Financial Times weekend edition, a certain kind of person. And she says that being an IFS officer is not just a profession, but it's a lifestyle. It's how you conduct yourself. Is that true? And does that actually help in some way in carrying out diplomacy on a world stage?
I don't think it was ever true, and it certainly isn't true now. It is a bit of a myth about an elitist, hyper westernized person dealing with the rest of the world. I would accept that you need to develop strong articulation skills and strong, perhaps, linguistic skills, because you are dealing with the rest of the
Correct.
world. But you don't necessarily have to be elitist. There are lots of foreign service officers who've done very well, who have none of those attributes that are being talked about. So I think what you wouldn't fit that profile, but if you were picking a foreign service officer, someone who would be posted overseas to deal with the rest of the world, you would really need someone who's quite rooted in the Indian ethos, Indian civilization, because at some point you are expected to project that. So, I would say the reverse is the
Actually, she talks about both these things being true. That's some,
absolutely.
yeah.
So you need to be grounded in your own ethos and culture and civilization and understanding of India's kind of national priorities. But at the same time, be comfortable in dealing with global stakeholders, global elites. So you ought to be comfortable in articulating your positions to them, and you need to be comfortable often in doing it in their language. So I think these are basic skills, but more important is how you are understanding your national priorities and how you're able to project them and how you're able to analyze what it is that you can get out of the station wherever you're posted, which is of relevance to your country. So I would rate the analytical skills much higher than these personal skills, which are useful, but not necessarily the top of the pops when when you decide what your skill set should be.
Just for our viewers, the author I'm talking about is Kira Yu, and I'll put a link to her book in the Dropbox. Speaking of the skill sets required to be an IFS officer, what are these skill sets? What is the training that you go undergo as a trainee diplomat? And can one actually train someone to be a diplomat, or is this something that you learn on the job?
Well, I think there's a certain set of basic skills that are required, some intelligence, some articulation, some academic rigor, which is tested by the UPSC through its process. So that is a given. But beyond that, now we have the Foreign Service Institute, which is training these young diplomats.
By now, you mean since when has that
Well,
existed?
in the sense that in the early years, we didn't have, and let's say till the 80s,
Okay.
we didn't have a strong foreign service training facility. So they were trained along with the other
Okay.
domestic services, with the IAS. They were even sent on district
Yes,
assignments
yes.
in
That
order
was, I
to.
believe, discontinued under the Modi government, the
That's right,
district.
because they were spending a lot of time learning perhaps things that they didn't really need. There is a case for being rooted in India and being able to visit a village and
Yeah.
understand what's happening there. But I think now the skill sets being given are different, and I think it's certainly a teachable and learnable skill. Because if you're a young person today, you shouldn't be under the impression that I can't be a diplomat. I don't have that natural ability. You,
I would think that for sure.
yeah. So it's a teachable, learnable skill, and it's true that if you're a complete introvert, you will be uncomfortable. You probably need to be an extrovert, being able to deal with people from across cultures and to be able to understand them, interpret them. But I think it's very teachable, very learnable.
And did you feel comfortable from the very beginning with all these skills that were required to be a.
I think I also learned along the way. It was, there's a very bizarre situation that you get into, I can say, in Russia or in Germany. You go to a diplomatic party as a young diplomat, and you have a sea of
Yeah.
people from another culture, and sipping wine, people talking to each other. How
Hmm.
comfortable are you in being able to walk up to them and
Yeah.
introduce themselves, people who might belong to another culture? And I think it's something you learn over the years.
And I would imagine that's very difficult because that's not then just a thing about your personality. It's a professional requirement. You ought to have that.
Absolutely. And this is something, but again, it's something you can easily develop.
Hmm.
You may not be very comfortable. It'll be out of your comfort zone
Hmm.
initially,
Hmm.
but it's something that people do. And much of what you would expect a diplomat to be doing would be in analyzing and reporting. We tend to focus a lot on the social skills, which
Hmm.
are important, but I would say the analytical skills are
Hmm.
even more important.
Hmm.
And the skill sets across the board
Hmm.
can easily be learned. And
Hmm.
it's people often with all these skill sets who may be very sophisticated, speak very well,
Hmm.
be great at languages, have often done badly because
Hmm.
either they lacked a moral fiber, or they lacked an analytical
Yeah.
ability, or they missed the glitter and glamour and thought it to be the real stuff. The
Hmm.
real stuff is really promoting your national interest in those countries and learning and reporting back home.
Hmm. Before we get into your the specifics of your postings, Ambassador, there are two questions that I'm interested in asking you, which are more generic. When an IFS officer is allotted a region, wherever they're supposed to be posted, or even on the MEA desk if they're allotted a certain region, what are the tools, specific tools that you deploy to understand a new country's economy, its foreign policy, but also when you are posted there to basically belong in its culture?
Yes, so I think the way it works is that when you have a young foreign service officer,
Hmm.
and suppose the officer has gone through the UPSC, and I should in fact say she,
Hmm.
because we had more than 50%
Hmm.
women in some of
Okay.
the recent batches. So she
Hmm.
comes in and she gets trained at the Foreign Service Institute, which
Hmm.
is dedicated and gets a lot of skill
Hmm.
sets going, including communication, including the whole idea of
Language.
reading books and so on. And then you go to a phase where you are allotted a language,
Hmm.
and that could be the UN languages, but that could also be some other widely spoken languages. It could be German, it could be Japanese,
Hmm.
it could be Indonesian. And your first posting typically tends to be
Okay.
in the area of your linguistic skill, or
Hmm.
the language you're learning.
And
So
how are
I
these
learned Russian.
languages? Yes, but how are these languages allotted? On what is there
So
a criteria?
it's a choice plus lottery system. It's changed over the years. I
Hmm.
don't know exactly
Hmm.
how it's done now,
Hmm.
but it would be offered to you that they would say that, okay, there are 20 of you. We're offering four French, three Arabic,
Hmm.
five Russian, that kind of thing. And people pick and choose, and then
Right.
you go according to the, if everyone wants French, for instance,
Hmm.
you would then go according to
Hmm.
the level of the merit list and so on. So it is
Which is the
the
most popular country or language that people pick?
it varies.
Hmm.
I preferred to choose Russian in those days
Hmm.
because the feeling was that Chinese and Russian languages are very important.
This is also the late 80s.
Yeah, late
Hmm.
80s, and
Hmm.
it's important. These relationships are important. These area specializations are important. But more importantly, the other languages are easier to pick up. You can
Right.
pick up French and
Yeah.
along the
And
way.
how much time did it take you to pick up Rush?
So you do spend a year of your posting actually learning the language. So it was
Hmm.
an immersion method. So when I was
Hmm.
posted to Moscow, for instance, I was immersed into university, the Moscow State
Hmm.
University, and asked to learn the
Okay.
language there for 1 year. That was my job. So
Oh,
I think
okay.
that's a huge
Yeah.
privilege
Yeah.
if you love learning
Yeah.
languages.
Yeah.
And the same would be true of whether you're learning French or Spanish and sometimes for Chinese you need more.
Yeah.
And people who develop a passion for the language or show a special skill
Hmm.
are often given the option of training further to interpreter level. And some of the
Hmm.
finest young officers we've had who learned that language, they do go to California and so on,
Hmm.
have been interpreting at the head of state level. So they would
Hmm.
interpret for a conversation, say,
Hmm.
between Modi and Putin,
Correct. Yeah.
and that level, and that's very useful also because there could be some very sensitive information being exchanged, and an officer who's trained
Hmm.
would understand it better and get the nuances better.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that also has been an experiment.
Hmm.
Language is important, but not critical.
Hmm.
We expect people to have linguistic skills, but as they go along, you expect them to develop other skills as well.
Hmm. Hmm. And the tools to understand other facets of a culture, its economy, what do you do? What does an officer typically do within the confines of their room? What do they think is important to kind of embed themselves into a certain
Yeah, so
culture?
it's learning by immersion.
Hmm.
That's the best learning. So if you're in Paris, you're expected to just sort of go around,
Hmm.
talk, meet, make local friends,
Hmm.
and get into the culture. But you also, in terms of national interest, you do get a desk attachment,
Hmm.
which you could have in headquarters, where you read up on the files,
Hmm.
you learn the institutional experience
Hmm.
of serving in that geography,
Right.
that what it is like, and you yeah, and basically you also pick up
And
as you go along.
Ambassador, I would imagine that the advice of seniors would be very crucial as well. I remember even reading in your book, after your tenure in Pakistan got over, you called up two seniors, and this was much later in your career. In the beginning, do these sort of informal networks within the IFS community help?
Absolutely, they do. So, if you were a young foreign service officer today and you were told that, okay, you have to go and work in Beijing.
Hmm.
So, what you would do is you would go to the desk, you would meet the people working on the China division
Hmm.
and understand and read up. But
Hmm.
you would also go and meet someone retired or
Hmm.
someone in the system who had served in
Hmm.
Beijing very recently
Hmm.
and ask them what it was like,
Hmm. Hmm.
and
Do
get
you have
some.
still? Do you have a lot of young officers come to you for
I
this
do.
kind
I
of
do
advice?
have these conversations,
Hmm.
and especially when I go and speak at the Foreign Service Institute, people who've
Hmm.
taken Russian would ask me questions
Hmm.
on my times, and I think people try to get more recent experience because you also,
Yeah.
a, you're looking at something professional, and b, you're looking at life hacks.
Hmm.
How do I survive the cold?
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. That was
How
something I was
much.
wondering. You've also served in Canada as
That's
the
right. So,
ambassador.
what should I take for a minus 30 day?
Hmm.
That kind of thing.
Hmm.
So, I think more in the foreign service than perhaps in a domestic service,
Hmm.
part of the deal is your personal life, how you relate to that city,
Hmm.
how you relate to living abroad.
Hmm.
What are the challenges of that, and how do you
Hmm.
go about it, apart from the professional
Hmm.
challenges of
Hmm.
serving in that
Hmm.
place.
Hmm. You mentioned, of course, that it's not just your social comportment that matters in terms of how you present yourself, and that's not the only thing that matters, obviously, when you're a diplomat. Your analytical skills are equally important. Now, without getting into the specifics, tell us what are the kind of inputs and memos that the Indian government asks of a diplomat who's posted somewhere else?
Yes, so there are three things you report on.
Hmm.
One, you study the internal dynamics of that country. So, if you're posted in Canada, you are reporting on what's happening internally, who will win the election. So, that is a sort of political assignment. You could talk about.
And is this something that you're mostly reading from the papers, or do you have your own networks, your own?
So you need to do both,
Hmm.
and you could be reading the newspapers here
Hmm.
in Delhi, but what you need to be doing is meeting people, getting those
Hmm.
sources,
Hmm.
getting that intelligence,
Hmm.
getting the feel of the
Hmm.
place.
Hmm.
And one of our ministers, Sushma Swaraj, used to say, wherever you go, you should know the place like the back of your hand. She would give this advice to young diplomats, and so you get interested in the culture, the internal situation, the external relationships that they have, and the bilateral dynamics. And there, you have to also come up with ideas on how we can change that relationship, we can improve it, what we can add, and comparing it to others. So analytical would be in that area. We also would divide it into verticals in terms of the political relationship or the economic relationship. And there are a lot of the business of running an embassy is the consular stuff, which means visas, passports.
Correct. Yeah.
That can be a challenge. Diaspora diplomacy is an important issue.
Of
For
course.
instance, in the US, there are 5.1, 5.2 million people of Indian heritage. They can both become a resource, and you could be mapping them. So there are many aspects of the diplomacy you do, and you need to be continuously analyzing what is of interest to your country, which is India.
Hmm. Right. Before I now delve into your actual postings, I have to ask this question. You mentioned about the cold. I'm also wondering about the food. What do you mostly eat when you posted abroad? Do you get to cook your own? Like, do you have people to cook you Indian food?
Well, Indian food is now available everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
You probably won't find
Yeah.
a place where it
No,
isn't.
but
But, people have families,
hmm.
and they are paid well enough to be
Hmm.
able to afford having. And since a large part of what you do is entertaining others, or doing what we call representational entertainment, which means that you're probably having a dinner at home and calling a bunch of people, and just talking to them, and representing your country. So you do have support. You can take help from
Yeah.
India.
Okay.
You can take help locally, and that support normally one has and one can afford. So I think the food, if you're a gastronomic adventurer, you'll probably go and
Yeah.
experiment with local food a
Yeah.
lot. If you're
What did
more,
you do?
well, I did a both,
Hmm.
because my initial years, for instance, in Moscow was really like a student, because we were just immersed there, and I was experimenting with food and having anything that was available, anything that moved,
Yeah.
we ate.
Yeah.
But over a period of time, you learn to where that mix is, what your body takes, and you have all those choices. And I think it's like doing it even if you're in India. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not a very tough choice to make.
Yeah. Ambassador, I was going through all your different postings, and it strikes you immediately how you were posted in a certain place at almost always at such interesting moments in history. So in 1988, which is your first posting, it was in Moscow, and I imagine you had a ringside view of the fall of the Berlin Wall of the Soviet Union. Tell us some stories from that time, the experiences.
Yeah, so I think it was a fascinating time to be there. I was much too young and much too inexperienced to realize that I was living through a major historical moment. It was only in retrospect that one realized that that was the moment the Cold War was ending,
Yeah.
and the West was winning it, and the Soviet Union was collapsing. So I did go for a drive, and in the Moscow of those days, it used to be very popular to go for a drive across Europe. And I bought my first car, and it was all very exciting. And we went, and I went 1 year to across the Berlin Wall, and the next year I went again, and we crossed over to Berlin, where the wall was gone. So it was 1989,
Yeah.
1990, and I think that was really exciting to see all those changes. In Moscow, we saw a coup, an actual coup unfold in the streets of Moscow in 1990. So again, those were really seminal historical moments, and being able to watch them, to be able to study them, is always very
And
exciting.
what was your brief at the time? What were you supposed to be doing?
Well, I was the political officer, so I was
Hmm.
called the internalist. So I was studying the Soviet Union internally, and since I knew the language, I could
Hmm.
read the newspapers, Pravda,
Hmm.
Izvestia. So I was
Hmm.
studying this. I was part of the political team at
Hmm.
the embassy, and I believe we got right at that point
Hmm.
that there was a possibility of a coup,
Hmm.
that there was a process going on from 1985 of
Hmm.
reform in the Soviet Union. It was called perestroika and glasnost.
Okay.
And we felt it was going off the rails,
Hmm.
that something would go wrong with this situation. And of course, no one could have predicted that the entire
Yeah.
house would collapse and the Soviet Union itself would
Yeah.
collapse.
Yeah.
And of course, you were mentioning my career path. Um, Often I'm held responsible for all these things. So the Soviet Union collapses when I'm there. Germany reunites when I'm
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
When I was in Poland, we had Brexit,
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
British leave, and of course, don't even ask me about Pakistan
Pakistan.
and Canada,
Yeah.
where we had a lot of trouble
Yeah. Yeah.
starting when I was there.
Yeah. When your posting in Moscow is over, you come to the Commerce Ministry. You posted domestically from 1991 to 1995. And this is, again, at the time when India is liberalizing. What was your role at the Commerce Ministry at this point?
Yeah, so I think again it was a ringside view and of economic change and policy change. When I came in 91, I was coming at a time when the Soviet Union was collapsing,
Hmm.
and India was learning to deal, instead of with one country, with 15 different countries.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I was the only one who could rattle off the names of all the countries and the capitals. So
Hmm.
people from different ministries were calling me and saying, which is this new country? Does it have an embassy?
Yeah.
And so for 1 year, I was in the Ministry of External Affairs, and I was part of making those notes
Hmm.
about what our policy should be towards this new situation of 15 different countries, how we should deal with them.
Hmm.
And then I had
How
a
old would you be at this point?
well, I was at that point about 28. I
Hmm.
joined at the age of 25.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then I moved in to the Commerce Ministry. I volunteered for that role because I had an MBA, I had
Hmm.
economics, and I said, let me, if
Hmm.
possible, go to an economic ministry and
Hmm.
see what it's like. And again, there I dealt with the transition from rupee trade, which used to be what we had. It was almost a barter rupee trade with
Yeah.
the Soviet Union and with Eastern
Hmm.
Europe, and towards a normal trade in
Hmm.
dollars. So,
Hmm.
we were part of that transition
Hmm.
team.
Hmm.
That was fascinating work at that point. But also to be able to watch the Narasimha Rao reforms,
Hmm.
because what happened in that time, the minister then for commerce was Chidambaram,
Hmm.
and he was at the cutting edge of the changes. So the exim policy of India, which used to be this thick, was
Hmm.
suddenly one fine day dictated by Chidambaram to his secretary while the commerce secretary sat in front of him. And, in about 2 hours, they said, let's just simplify this whole
Wow.
tome into a small kind of document, make it simpler.
Hmm.
So, the dismantling of the license permit Raj,
Hmm.
which was happening, I could see.
Hmm.
And I had seen some of the stories earlier of bureaucrats kind of misusing their position, making people stand in line because they had
Hmm.
discretionary powers. All that was changing
Hmm. Hmm.
rapidly in
And what
the
was the mood within the bureaucracy like at the time? I would imagine people wouldn't be too
some
enthusiastic about.
confusion,
Hmm.
because some would say nostalgically, oh, here um, people, industrialists used to line up to koi aata
Hmm.
nahi,
Hmm.
that kind of
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
But I think mostly it was supportive
Okay.
of the kind of change that was being attempted. Of course, the bureaucracy was losing its
Yeah, so
powers.
one would imagine that they would resist some
Yeah,
of
but I
these.
think most of the people were enlightened enough to know that this
Hmm.
was hugely something strong that India was attempting, which would be in the national advantage,
Hmm.
and would help India. So I think
Hmm.
that was the overall sense.
Hmm.
And while I think half the bureaucracy would have been a little disappointed.
Hmm.
The powers were going away.
Yeah.
But I think the other half, or especially in the senior echelons, were part of and were party to the reforms that were happening.
Hmm. Hmm. Post liberalization, Ambassador, how did it change how India was, or how an Indian diplomat was viewed by the world? Because you're one of the few diplomats who would have now who would have seen the pre-liberalization and the post-liberalization perception that people had of India. How did that change how people viewed you or Indian diplomats in general? Was there a market change?
Yes, so I saw quite a big shift through
Hmm.
my career from let's say the 80s to the late 90s and to 2000. So it so happened that after my commerce ministry innings, I went on a commerce ministry post to Berlin
Hmm.
in Germany,
Hmm.
where we were pushing the idea and selling the idea of the new India, the new reformed India, and trying to invite Germany in.
Hmm.
So we were writing these briefs and inviting companies to invest in India, to look in
Hmm.
India. So this is the first steps of trying to sell that new India story.
Hmm.
And I think we created a new division within the Ministry of External Affairs, which was talking of economic relations and
Hmm.
enticing investment. So the definition of a diplomat was changing. You
Right.
needed to be not just a guy who or a person who would examine political matters and discuss political relationship and war and peace,
But
but
also understand
also
economics.
understand economics. And you would be talking of trade and investment and tourism, and you
Hmm.
needed to develop both the vocabulary and the understanding of this.
Hmm.
And only when I finished my assignment to Germany and then came to Delhi and got pulled in to be in the Prime Minister's office,
Hmm.
that's where, with Vajpayee, I could see India ascending
Hmm.
in this chain and being on the high table. You know,
Yeah.
Vajpayee was a leader who the West was trying to court,
Hmm.
and India was being recognized. So, 98, India went nuclear.
Yeah.
And right after that, after a couple of years of freeze, Vajpayee was being courted and
Hmm.
on the high table everywhere
Yeah.
globally.
Yeah. But some of these learnings that you mentioned, that you had to develop an economic vocabulary, understand the nuances of trade and commerce and so on, was that mostly an individual's initiative, or was there actual training that you got within the government to that was given to all diplomats to enable them to do this?
Well, not formally, not in a structured way, and
Hmm.
not enough. I
Do you think
think
there should have been more?
should have been more, I think. But the way it was done and the way it is done is that you learn on the fly, right? What happens is that you'll get a very good sort of note
Hmm.
saying this is what India is doing, this is where we are going, and you're supposed to understand it and internalize it, and develop your own nuances in dealing with. If you're in Germany, you'll deal with it with a different
Hmm.
spin. If in France differently, in the US
Hmm.
differently, in Russia it'll be a different
Hmm.
approach.
Hmm.
So I think the approach was but again, the broader lesson is that if you're a diplomat or a civil servant, much of the learning has to be a self learning. You can expect your system to train you, to skill you, to upskill you, and say that we'll teach you, for instance, in this day and age, AI.
Hmm.
But really speaking, you have to take the initiative on your own
Yeah.
and be able to learn these newer skills. Ask yourself in the next 10 years, what
Hmm.
is it that I should know,
Hmm.
so that I can innovate better on my job and
Hmm.
do a better
Hmm.
job.
Hmm. Sir, I grew up in the 90s myself, and my idea of a diplomat was actually formed through watching retired diplomats on NDTV. I'm very curious to know how television changed diplomacy. Did it have any impact? How now people could be consuming it within their homes. So, did that change diplomacy in any way?
I think it's a very interesting point. It did, because you just became a little more aware. when in the 80s, as I told you, I hadn't seen a
Exactly.
foreign service officer or met one,
Yeah.
until I joined the service, or I met someone, or a few officers just before I decided to join in, because I didn't feel the need.
Yeah.
But when this is more accessible, either on social media or
Mm.
electronic media,
Mm.
that people who are in that profession, then as a young person, you look at that profession
Yeah. But
as an
differently. Yeah.
alternative.
Yeah.
You might see a Netflix series on the diplomat and be impressed,
Yeah.
and you may see a diplomat talking on television, and get a sense of what they're
Mm.
doing, what they're talking about, and if that
Mm.
resonates with you, that
Mm.
could
Mm.
be
Mm.
inspiring
Yeah.
you to make that career choice.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely true, that
Mm.
it's now more accessible. You
Mm.
understand a lot more what
Mm.
people
Mm.
actually do in these professions.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. You've already talked about a little bit about your tenure as the private secretary to Atal Bihari Vajpayee, which was from 1999 to 2004. Tell us a little bit about working with the Prime Minister. How was he like? And for a lot of our viewers who might be very young, how does one compare him to Prime Minister Narendra Modi? But we can come to that later. Just some anecdotes, some experiences with working with Mr. Vajpayee. How was he like as a Prime Minister?
For civil servant, working in the prime minister's office is a huge privilege,
Hmm.
because this is the nerve center of
Correct.
government.
Yeah.
And it's been this way from Nehru's time. The prime minister's office is the nerve
If
center.
I'm not wrong, Nehru, the Prime Minister's office was started with Lal Bahadur Shastri.
But
It was the
even
cabinet
well,
secretariat that was.
even the prime minister, Nehru, had a secretariat, right?
Hmm.
And there were people working for him.
So
He
that
would
was
have,
almost like a
yeah.
PMO.
So it was formally structured in a different way. It was called the
Hmm.
prime minister's secretariat, then the prime minister's office,
Hmm.
but it becomes a sort of nerve center, and it becomes an important sort of office where you get an overview of policy. So, to
Hmm.
begin with, that is the exciting bit.
Hmm.
But being a private secretary with the prime minister is again giving you, purely from the point of view of exposure, an excellent vantage
Hmm.
to be able to see all of government
Hmm.
and to see the intersection of government and politics.
Hmm.
Because, the prime minister is also a
Yeah.
political leader
Hmm.
and the head of the cabinet. Vajpayee was also the head of the NDA, the ruling
Hmm.
coalition. So
And
you
as the Prime Minister's private secretary, I imagine the work that you do is a mix of both.
Well, you end up doing, the office is a big
Hmm.
one,
Hmm.
but the prime minister's private secretary is the last stop for all the information, or much of the information that is coming to him, or the
Hmm.
files that are coming to
Hmm.
him, or in fact, the access to the
Hmm.
prime minister. So
Hmm.
that is also managed by his
Hmm.
private office. So in all through my tenure, there were two private secretaries,
Hmm.
one typically from the IAS
Hmm.
and one from the foreign service,
Hmm.
or that's really started becoming institutionalized after I had
Hmm.
joined there, because we felt
Were
that,
you one of the first IFS officers in that position?
yes, I was, but long before me, Narsimha Rao had a private secretary called Ramu Damodran.
Okay.
So Ramu was perhaps the first, because he was
From the IFS.
he was from the foreign service, and he was the private secretary with the external affairs minister, which Narsimha Rao was.
Hmm.
And then when he became prime
Okay.
minister,
Hmm.
he moved there.
Hmm.
But it started getting institutionalized, and the logic was that today's prime minister, willy nilly, is a global statesman.
Hmm.
He has to deal with 20 global summits every
Hmm.
year.
Hmm.
He has to accept various visitors. He has to visit various countries. Foreign policy is a very important issue
Correct. Hmm.
with the prime minister, and therefore they felt it was useful to have someone with some experience, both of the foreign office and of protocol in general. But the role becomes much wider.
Hmm.
It's being deciding on access, or who meets the prime minister and who doesn't. So getting the diary going,
Mm.
and also the files going. So, some files have to be approved by the prime minister, and you need to be discussing them with the prime minister. So, getting that access done. And a prime minister like Vajpayee, the interesting thing about him was when he became prime minister, he was already 75.
Mm. Mm.
And, I was half his age.
Mm.
So, he was the big picture man, the vision man,
Mm.
and he would give very broad directions to his principal secretary and his people, and you were expected to fill in the details. He
Mm.
was at that point also getting on in years. So one of the things he told me, you better hang around all my meetings because I forget things.
And did
So
he?
so
Did he
I was
forget them
sitting
a
at the
lot?
back of his meetings, and my job was also to serve as his institutional memory and
Mm.
remind him that this is what had happened then, and before each meeting, sort of do a brief.
Mm. Mm.
uh, you asked me how he's different. Each prime minister brings his own style
Mm.
or her own style, and I think the difference between this prime minister and that one, between PM Modi and PM Vajpayee, would be in the big big picture approach, because Vajpayee was the big picture man. He was older, and therefore he was spending less time in the office and he was doing more the vision thing. uh, what PM Modi does is he's also very hands on. So he's works with a huge energy. The man is working 16 hours a day and with a great deal of energy and getting into details of a lot of issues.
Mm.
But Vajpayee came to the job with an understanding of foreign policy. He'd been foreign minister.
Mm. Mm.
He'd been interested from his youth in foreign
Mm.
policy. He had a intuitive sense.
Mm.
When Modi came to power in 2014, he didn't know
He's
too
coming as a
much. He
chief
hadn't
minister
dealt.
of.
He'd been
Mm.
chief minister for 14 years. But he had the brilliance of being able to understand his own limitations and hence, rapidly learn, but also ensure that he had a foreign minister like Jaishankar,
Mm.
who would be a sort of technocrat minister who would understand the game
Mm.
and be able to interpret it. Of
Mm.
course, over a period of years, he's developed a very natural, organic way of understanding
Mm.
these issues. But again, I think it's a mark of a politician to know where your limitations are
Mm.
and where you need support and where you don't. So I think
Mm.
both Vajpayee and Modi Modi knows his limitations.
Mm.
Vajpayee knew his limitations and felt that the detailing could be done by somebody else,
Mm.
but the big picture is clear.
Yeah. Ambassador, very recently, in fact, Prime Minister Modi also appointed a private secretary who happens to be from the IFS, and there were so many media stories about how she's probably the youngest private secretary to the PM. And I'm also struck by how you said you were half of Mr. Vajpayee's age when you were serving as his private secretary. I just want to know, at a personal level, isn't it too overwhelming a responsibility being in your 30s, I would imagine,
Yeah.
at the time, to be serving as the Prime Minister's private secretary?
you know it is for a week, and then you get used to it,
Hmm.
because it's the nature of the game. It was overwhelming because you don't see the prime minister, or you never interact. You could spend your entire career never having
Yeah.
interacted with the prime minister, but to be now pushed into his company and spending more time
And
with
how
the.
was one picked for that post?
Well, it in multiple ways. It just so happened that the prime minister's then principal secretary was Brijesh Mishra, who
Yes.
was also a retired
Hmm.
foreign service
Foreign service.
person,
Yes.
and they had developed a very strong
Yes, of
bond.
course.
And Brijesh Mishra, as I later learned, felt that it would be good to have a foreign service officer there.
Hmm.
And they felt that the foreign service officer, he felt, wouldn't have an agenda, wouldn't be in any way embedded in domestic politics. So would be, it would be interesting to have that variety. Let's have one from the IAS and one from the foreign
Hmm.
service. So that was the understanding. And so he simply asked, and I don't know, he didn't know me from Adam. And they asked the Ministry of External Affairs to send a panel of names, and I got picked up. So that just a little accident that kind of defines your career.
Yeah.
And I was then in Germany. I didn't even know. So
Hmm.
I was sort of reluctant to come back. But then my ambassador told me that, look, if you get called by the Prime Minister's office, you don't say
You
no.
don't say
Because I
no.
said, why should I go? I'm fine here, and so on. So that's how it worked out.
How do you assess his Prime Minister Vajpayee's larger foreign policy vision? Because you said he was more of a vision man, not sort of bothering with trivialities. What was his broad foreign policy vision?
Well, I think Vajpayee, and I'm writing a book on it, so I can share with you. I felt that India was living through a Nehruvian consensus in its early years, and that consensus began to break down in the
Correct.
90s. And when Vajpayee came, he became the coalition man, the
Yes.
man who believed in consensus and building that consensus. So he succeeded in building what was a Vajpayee consensus. And I think he added a lot of value to it because he believed in some of the enduring foreign policy tenets, which is
From
uh,
Nehru's time.
yeah, which had continued in a very broad sense, that non-alignment, which we called strategic autonomy, that we won't be in any camp, but we will, define our own vision. A neighborhood should be privileged over other areas. So, all that he believed in. But he was also the prime minister who made the decision to go nuclear. So
Yeah.
he believed in strength.
Yeah.
And then his challenge was to get the world to agree that India was a benign rising power and not a dangerous one. So we were in 98, after we went nuclear, we were almost ostracized by the world.
Yes. Yes.
It was a freezing of relations particularly with the West.
Yes. And you were
And
in Berlin at the time.
yes, I was in Berlin at that time. But Vajpayee's policy was about winning back friends, persuading them. So, for instance, with the US, with the EU, with Russia, he signed strategic partnership agreements. So, he had this broad vision of that India should be on the high table, India should benefit from the world. And the detailing was done by his Chanakya, which was Brijesh Mishra, and the rest of us chipped in, and the system was asked to chip in. But much of his time was also spent in dealing with the Pakistan problem,
Yeah.
because that was again defining much of
Yeah.
his term. So he had a foreign policy vision, but he wouldn't get into a lot of details, of which way to define it. But the vision was very clear, and the direction was his, in a very fundamental way.
Yeah, and I think his sort of preoccupation with Pakistan at the time is important because so much was happening. But
Right.
I do want to ask you, when you were posted in Berlin at the time India decided to go nuclear, uh, what was it? What was that time like? How did you actually have? Because you said you had to win back the West in a certain way. What was your day-to-day work at the time like?
It was a huge challenge. Of course, my then ambassador faced it more, because the Germans were very, very cynical about nuclear
Yeah,
power in
yeah.
general and about India going nuclear in particular. But that was true of all of Europe. And they were talking of sanctions against India. They were talking of criticizing India. They were talking of cap, rollback, stop this nuclear program. It makes the world too dangerous. I instinctively, as a young diplomat, then believed it was the right step to take. But I felt that maybe the wrong timing, because we didn't understand this government, and people were ascribing motives to the government, that they are doing it just to consolidate power and so on. But later, as I understood it more, I realized that was something that had to be done, perhaps should have been done a few years earlier. And perhaps should have been done, a lot of people believe, in the 1960s,
Hmm.
when China had gone nuclear, and
Hmm.
before
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
non-proliferation
Okay.
treaty
Treaty.
came. So we could have done it in the 60s. But this was the prime minister who took the leap. So
Hmm.
full credit to him.
Yeah.
And he instinctively believed that the world will come around to it. We just got to brace for this moment. They'll all say boycott India and India's gone rogue and so on,
Hmm.
but we'll be able to persuade them. And that's what I think his policy was about. He managed to do.
Hmm. So I now also want to talk about this time when so much was happening with Pakistan. There was the entire Agra Summit that happened. What was your role like?
I had imagined myself being the fly on the wall,
Hmm.
because I wasn't a critical decision maker. I was the support staff of the prime minister.
Hmm.
But by definition, being the support staff of the prime minister, you end up watching these, seminal historical moments,
Hmm.
and being able to sometimes participate in them. So I
Hmm.
tell the story. I've told a few of these stories in my book for the first time, and I tell the story of how the Agra Summit I can claim to have sabotaged, because this was a moment when television was new,
Yeah.
NDTV was new, and
Yeah.
General Musharraf had given an interview,
Hmm.
or not really an interview. He talked at breakfast with a bunch of editors.
Hmm.
And it so happened that NDTV had their camera on, and whether by accident or design or in consultation with the Pakistan embassy, they decided to air it
Hmm.
while the Agra summit was on, which the format for which was Musharraf and Vajpayee were sitting like you and I are
Hmm.
sitting, with just two note takers behind them, and they went on for hours talking about
Hmm.
various things. And Vajpayee was unaware of the fact that this had been aired. And the whole national mood would have changed with that, because Musharraf made a lot of hawkish statements that
Hmm.
about Kashmir, that these are freedom fighters, not terrorists, and so
Hmm.
on. And we had to convey this to Vajpayee.
Hmm.
So Brijesh Mishra, the principal secretary, told was there, and some of us were sitting there, and he said, "Look, the boss has to be told this has happened because he's talking unaware of this development." And so it was my job to write that note. I discussed it with Brijesh Mishra. He gave me some points, and I had
Hmm.
it typed up. And then I went to walked into this meeting room, the summit room. The security had to allow me in. They knew me,
Hmm. Hmm.
but the two leaders had to interrupt this conversation, watch me, and I gave the prime minister this piece of paper. At which point, and of course I walked away. So the both of them are looking at me. He read it, and he turned to the general and said, "General Saab, ye aapne kya kar diya?" So from that point, the summit went south. And the joke in PMO was that I went and sabotaged it.
Much like the
So,
Berlin Wall.
yeah, exactly. So it was an interesting time, and it basically in these high tension summits or meetings, you get to be inside the room, and you get to be watching the dynamics of it, and the intersection of politics, of geopolitics, of government. And so I think that's a privilege to have
Yeah.
been able to watch all that.
Hmm. It was also a different time, a different generation of leaders almost. How would you say generationally both the Indian and Pakistani leaderships have changed from then to now in
Well,
how they
Pakistan
approach each
hasn't
other?
changed too much,
Hmm.
because it was then an army
Hmm.
dictator
Hmm.
running the country. It's now an army dictator running the country. In India, uh, again, we remain a democracy, and often it's you circle back to the same situation. Vajpayee was leading a NDA coalition, right?
Hmm.
And we are back after 10 years of BJP majority into a coalition government with a BJP with a less than majority. So, in a sense, we are back to that space. Each leader will bring a different kind of flavor to the job.
But do you
But
think there's a generational shift in for how India approaches foreign policy?
yes, so I think the generational shift is A, the world has changed, and B, India is much more technocratic, much more realistic,
Hmm.
realist about foreign policy. In a sense, realism is about the exercise of power. And Vajpayee started that by saying we have to go nuclear, we have to be a nuclear power, and that will give us power. But now we have both nuclear, military, economic power.
Hmm.
We exercise it, I think, in a more professional way. So
Hmm.
even if you see our communication and you see some of the statements that our minister makes even in public,
Hmm.
they are more confident,
Hmm.
and this confidence seeps into the system. So
Hmm.
when our ambassadors, our envoys, our diplomats are overseas, they also have very clear briefs on what they
Hmm.
can or cannot say, and they say them
Hmm.
out there. So I think it's a more confident India, it's a
Hmm.
more powerful India, because you're the third largest economy now,
Yeah.
you're a powerful military, or you would be a third largest economy in a couple of years. But basically, what is happening is generationally, what has shifted is that India's power has shifted. And of course, the tools have shifted, technology has shifted, leaders are much more visible now.
Hmm.
Social media is much more
Hmm.
sort of being used by them.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that is what is changing.
Hmm.
The essence of the dispensation of power remains the same,
Okay.
but the tools change.
Hmm.
And as India's own position in the world changes, the foreign policy dynamic would also change.
Some of my friends who are young diplomats tell me of this thing called Pakistan's charm diplomacy. I'm not fully sure of what to make of it, but what do you think? Is there something called Pakistan's charm diplomacy, that they do diplomacy in a very charming way? How is Pakistani diplomacy different from Indian diplomacy?
I would say this is a myth that has prevailed, and maybe in the past,
Hmm.
the Pakistanis who tended to be from elite backgrounds, from elite families, and educated abroad tended to be more suave and sophisticated, and
Hmm.
perhaps speaking English
Hmm.
in a different way.
Hmm.
But I think this has never been true. Pakistan, at some stage, may have punched above its weight,
Hmm.
but that is no longer true. I
Hmm.
think we have several strengths in our diplomacy,
Hmm.
and Pakistan tries to punch above its weight because I think, in all fairness, if it's a terrorism exporting country,
Hmm.
they have to shake off that label and do their diplomacy, which they try their best to do.
Hmm.
But I wouldn't buy that they are significantly different or significantly more competent. They're
Hmm.
probably they have a bad hand and they don't particularly play it well.
Hmm, hmm. In your book, Ambassador, you also mention of this dilemma that I think, as an Indian diplomat posted in Pakistan, which you were as the High Commissioner from 2017 to 2019, you face that on one hand there is of course your diplomatic constraints, but on the other hand you meet ordinary Pakistani people who are very affable, who speak the same language as you, who eat the same food as you. How does one sort of reconcile this dilemma, and how does it take a toll in some way on you personally?
I think one has to get used to it, because this is really what I talk about, the Pakistan paradox. You
Hmm.
could have a troubled relationship with the Pakistani ruling elites,
Hmm.
the army and the others, and some parts of the bureaucracy.
Hmm.
But at the people level, it's a very friendly
Yeah.
relationship, even for an Indian diplomat. So
Hmm.
there used to be several people that one was very friendly with, and that remains the kind of situation there because of the cultural affinity.
Hmm.
There was so much cultural closeness that we listened to the same music, had
Yeah.
the same food,
Yeah.
we have the same kind of parties, that I
Hmm.
was sort of a welcome guest
Hmm.
even at their weddings. And there's
Hmm.
this whole Punjabi thing about demonstrating that you are connected with all kinds of diplomats. But apart from that, I think the fact remains that we shouldn't be confusing the social niceties with the reality
Correct.
that we are working in a hostile environment, and a lot of people are waiting to trip you up. So as diplomats, you have to be conscious of that. You have to be conscious not to be trapped, and you have to be conscious to be saying the right thing all the time.
Hmm. Hmm. What did you discover about Pakistan in your 2 years while you were there that is neither captured by the romanticism of the nostalgics or the hawkishness or sometimes just the impersonal pragmatism? Is there something that you discovered about Pakistan in your 2 years there?
Well, I think deep down I felt they were not particularly happy with the way their governments were handling the relationship. They wouldn't say so, they aren't able to say so. But deep down, they feel that India has done a much better job of running the country than Pakistan has. They are very unhappy with the way their elites have led their country down to a lot of trouble, a lot of misery. And I think that is something that comes through in a lot of conversations, though they won't like to admit it to an Indian. So you won't hear that in their media and in their conversations. But the fact is that the distance between the countries and the difference between the countries is clear to them.
Hmm. Of course, you had the unfortunate distinction of being the only High Commissioner of Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan who had to be expelled in the aftermath of the abrogation of Article 370. And for all those who are interested to read about this very riveting account, I really urge you to pick up this book. Um, but I have to now ask my last question, Ambassador. Um, if you had to explain this word to a lay person who more often than not uses the word diplomacy with a negative connotation, what would you say? What is the most human thing about diplomacy or about being a diplomat?
Well, I think, really speaking, at the end of the day, it is expressing your country's view. And that's what diplomacy is about, trying to persuade people by expressing your country's view. And you need to do it well. It's in common parlance, you would say that he's being diplomatic, which means
Yeah.
he's lying,
Yeah.
which isn't quite right.
Hmm.
So diplomacy has several definitions. One of them is that you have to slap without it hurting. So
Hmm.
you have to say the tough things sugar coated, and you also need to be able to persuade the other party to a certain point of view or to
Hmm.
a certain outcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ambassador. I've actually, this episode has been so much learning for me as well, because as I told you, I'm not a student of diplomacy, but this has been such an excellent conversation. And I hope our audiences find it as useful. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
joining us.
Sanya. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be back with another episode of The Officer's Desk next week. Thanks for watching.